Yeah, good evening. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden. We're doing the Orthodox Apologetics channel. Today I was going to talk about church fathers and how to use them in apologetics. It's just me today, right now. I don't know if Father Enoch is going to show up. It turns out that um, one of the monastics um, attached to the abbey is in intensive care. So the female monastic, and just any prayers you can offer. I just got the news a little while ago, and so I get my guess is that the fathers of the abbey went over to the hospital. So past that, I'm not sure what to say. Kind of took the wind out of me because you don't expect things like that. You know, basically an hour before you're going on, and so basically, give me 1 second, folks. Just responding to individual things and individual comments, questions, because again, usually it's easier to go back and forth when discussing things with people and what I wanted to talk about. And forgive me if I sound a little bit winded, but that was kind of a surprise and came out of left field. So I had I known earlier, probably would have canceled today's show because I don't like being here by myself. But I mean, I'll do it. But I can take questions. Why suffering orthodoxy asks why are Saints Porphyrius and Paisius not considered saints within true orthodoxy? Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is pretty obvious from the icon I have here. That's Saint Joseph of Petrograd, who isn't considered a saint in the Moscow Patriarchate or most of world Orthodoxy. Again, until Orthodoxy is united in the truth of the faith, and everyone is against the falsehood of ecumenism, and everyone is against the falsehood of modernism, you're going to see such levels of division. I don't know whether Fathers Porphyrius or Paisius are saints or not. I know there are some things that make me suspect of virtually all the new Athonite elders, and that's only because of the fact that there was a period after the 1970s where a group called the New Holy Mountain Fathers were brought in, basically at the behest of Constantinople. And so, unfortunately, a lot of them said things that don't match up with what you're used to hearing from even Mount Athos, or so on and so forth. Um, you'll hear things like the whole good ecumenism versus bad ecumenism. It's stupid. Any term that people label as good ecumenism can be labeled as politics, can be labeled as being a good neighbor. You don't have to call it ecumenism. And the reason why it's being called ecumenism is to mask the demon. And I'm saying it very clearly. I have to, because what people are doing is they're taking that by making this distinction between good and bad ecumenism, what they're doing is they're effectively trying to cover up for what is essentially something that was evil to begin with. The idea of uniting orthodoxy with heresy is condemned within the holy canons. It's been condemned by the church since the very beginning because we have always fought against heresy. The point of preserving the faith of the apostles is to actually preserve it. And so the key here is that when we start trying to bless forms of ecumenism, what we're really doing is we're making excuses. And it's not I would say um it's not a good thing. And so, a lot of some of the modern Athonite fathers, I'm a little bit skeptical of. And I mean, I don't want to be rude, but like if you take a lot of these modern ecumenical teachers, like we had, and I'm not comparing them to her, people who were fans of Vasula Ryden, were vehement in their ecumenism, and they used to yell and scream at, anti-ecumenists, so on and so forth, because her mystical ecumenical vision mattered more than the fathers of the church. But we'll continue on, since I see a couple of you know what's it called, more questions and comments. But in any case, DL Verm Fide writes, people tell me I have no reason to be true Orthodox. What were some of the principal heresies of the MP during the Sergian era? Once again, I don't want to get into, I'd really like to stick to talking about actual, some apologetical topics, and that's just me. But, for today, but I wasn't even expecting to go on by myself. But the main heresy of the MP during the Sergian era was allowing theomachus and God haters to take control of the church, and that is by its very nature satanic. Imagine the church being a puppet of the devil's servants. It's a sin against God. Um, God blesses governments that do not consciously attempt to subvert his will, but that's literally the opposite of what communism was. It was literally an anti-God movement and remains that way today. Let me see here. Someone writes, I'm a former Calvinist seriously looking into orthodoxy. Where's the best place to start concerning the writings of the church fathers? I've read a few works, but mainly on a topical basis. Thanks in advance. Well, that's actually what I kind of wanted to talk about today. And what I would say is on that, the best place to start concerning the writings of the church fathers, especially as a somebody who uh, he was the first leader of the Catacomb Church, but I do want to get to what Russian Anime Butts was saying. Suffering, D.L. Verum says probably one Clement to Ignatius to Irenaeus to Justin Martyr. We can call that the Apostolic Fathers, and you can find a lot of their works actually collected. And that's a great place to start seeing the early church in action. I personally suggest, and I always suggest this, especially for people who are, who were raised basically isolating the Bible from the church fathers, is starting to use them in your biblical studies. As you read passages of scripture, use the commentaries of St. Augustine, use the commentaries of St. John Chrysostom. They're available, mostly for the New Testament, for free online. Use them for comparative analysis. See how the thinking of the fathers is on those same scriptural passages, as opposed to the sort of anarchy of scriptural interpretation that one finds outside of orthodoxy. So that's where I'd say go with what you know, and if you know the scriptures, then read the fathers on the scriptures. But definitely the apostolic fathers are a huge plus because of the fact that they also were taught by the apostles. So you can see that living link from the book of Acts down to the present day church. To Saint now was Saint Joseph of Petrograd the first catacomb bishop? He was actually the first leader of the catacomb church, because he was one of the deputies in line, the locum tenens to the patriarchal throne. So the catacomb church organized around him, and eventually he was martyred in the gulags. And if I think he was exiled and then shot, if I remember correctly. You said Theomostius. I'm not sure where I said Theomostius. I said St. John Chrysostomus or St. Augustine. Those are the commentaries of the scriptures that I would suggest. But in any case, I think I may have just been misheard because I'm talking a little low. I know I'm usually kind of boisterous and loud, but today I don't feel it. When you get kind of news like that just before you're about to do something, it just sucks the wind out of you. So, but in any case, let's see here. Oh, the guy who led the MP into heresy. Oh, theomachism. Theomachism is not that literally means God hating. The communist regime was from its very beginnings. The Soviets, from their very beginnings, made it as a goal to destroy the church and belief in God. This was actually part of their program. So for the church to claim to be subservient to a group that has its open aim of destroying the church is a perversion. It's a reversal of normalcy or humanity. It doesn't even make sense. So certainly, it doesn't make sense for Christianity to be under, even the Ottomans, as horrible as they were, weren't like, let's destroy all belief in God. That was their purpose, and you can read about the Soviet parades and so on and so forth. But the point is, you just have to look at the fruits and the 27 million who died under the Soviet yoke for their faith in Christ. So definitely, what's it called? I would say that that's the biggest thing. When people say, "Well, what heresies were the MP under Sergius?" Well, we could talk about ecumenism. We could talk a little bit of modernism, but the heresy was Sergianism itself. So that's the biggest issue you're going to find. But in any case, so yeah, this is a good place to start. I think that it's important that when we start to read the church fathers, we read them as a whole. We read their whole epistles. We look at their context. It is so easy for pseudo apologists to use quotes out of context, to not pay attention to what the fathers are saying. And so the very nature of the consensus patrum, the consensus of the Holy Fathers, is completely ignored. As a matter of fact, it's almost in a perversion reversed from how you're supposed to read the fathers. You're supposed to read in terms of the unity of the church and the desire to preserve the faith of the apostles. It's the same way we should be reading the ecumenical councils. But people who are desperate to attack the faith will always go for trying to see what they can find that's weird and different, so that they can justify things that the church wouldn't have accepted anyway. People love quoting Origen and saying, "Well, what about Origen?" Well, Origen was a heretic. And this is the sort of thing that we run into all the time. So you have to realize that you can quote Origen as a historical authority, but as a doctrinal authority, he's useless. He's been anathematized 20 times. But the point is, you have to know, and I'm sorry I keep saying the point is, it's a nasty habit that's been pointed out to me recently. You have to read the fathers in their agreement and in their totality. And so, one of the best works I would suggest starting with, because you can also understand the nature of the consensus of the fathers, is, again, and I've said it before in this show, the Commonatory of St. Vincent of Lerins. It's available free online. It's short chapters, read it a chapter at a time, and you'll slowly understand how the fathers often come to agreement on things. And even though there are disputed positions within the book of the Commonatory, it's trying to explain how the unity is still achieved. Another uh, reader, more modern reading that I would suggest would be New Martyr Hilarion Troitsky's Christianity or the Church, which actually cites the Commonatory, cites St. Augustine and a few other fathers, but it helps to explain that there is one thing we tend to forget when we read the church fathers is we're not just reading simple doctrinal books. They are doctrinal books. I'm not saying they're not. And they're historical books. I'm not saying that they're not. But what we're missing is the nature of paradosis, the nature of handing down in the church. And that's the biggest thing. The biggest thing is that the fathers were not simply saying stuff to teach and then someone wrote it in a book and hopefully it works and stuff like that. They were trying to hand down what they were taught, and that's what we're supposed to be doing also. We're supposed to be handing down and continuing what we were taught. That's how orthodoxy is preserved, and that's what makes it a living tradition. So that's what I would say on that matter. So um unless people want to, if people have questions about what I'm saying or what I'm trying to get at here, I'll get to it. Otherwise, I'll take questions. But what I'm aiming for here, and this is my biggest concern, is that when people read the fathers, they don't read them in a vacuum. You cannot do that. You have to, and this is part of the reason I suggest, read Christianity of the Church, read the Commonatory of St. Vincent of Lerins. Even if you read the catechisms of, say, Saint of Metropolitan Philaret of Moscow, or St. Innocent's Indication of the Way into the Kingdom of Heaven, what you notice is that there is a consistent attempt to collect what the fathers are saying, the spirit of what the fathers are saying. You can see that in the Arena and a number of other works. What the fathers were saying, that the fathers were copying down to save what the apostles were saying. It's an unending chain. That is the nature of the tradition. It's not just a collection of stuff. And so it's a living thing. And when that living thing is remembered, then we have an understanding of how Orthodox consensus works, because it doesn't just work like a lot of people try to present consensus as some sort of majority vote. That doesn't make any sense, because we're not simply applying consensus to the present. We're applying consensus to the entire past, all the way back to the apostles. What can be seen in the early church fathers is of just as much, if not more, relevance than modern saints today. Now, let's see here. DL wrote, also read the Didache. It's also essential. The Didache makes evident that the first century church didn't believe in innovative Protestant doctrines such as believers in visible baptism or symbolic Eucharist. And that's true. Those things that are taught in the Didache make it almost impossible for anyone, even on Wednesday and Friday fasting, which, as I've mentioned before on this show, if you know someone of, say, a Judaic background, the reason the apostles give is because they fasted on Mondays and Thursdays. And you can actually look that up, that those are in fact their fasting days. And the church broke from that, but to preserve fasting chose Wednesday and Friday, the day of Christ's betrayal and his crucifixion, as fast days. And that's why we do them to the present day. Let's see here. Suffering Orthodoxy said, why have you chosen to join the jurisdiction of which you belong as opposed to Roca or GOC? Well, I don't know. It's a strange question. If you find a true bishop, whatever your circumstances may be, and he confesses the right faith, then why would you go to another bishop? You'd have to have a reason. There'd have to be a logic. And this is something that a lot of people don't get. And it's pathetic, because what happens is you actually see true Orthodox actually trying to convert each other, which makes no sense because they're all true Orthodox. Not that this is not something that hasn't been seen in history. This was seen in the 4th century, as we've pointed out many times. But I think it's kind of silly. We have a planet where the overwhelming majority of people on Earth are not Orthodox Christian, and we're busy trying to convert the few people who already believe. It just doesn't make any sense. If you're asking me specifically why I like my jurisdiction, it's probably because of the fact that it's canonical. We're Western Rite. We have Western Rite people. And at the time, there was, I had personal reasons for why I did what I did. And so it was ultimately, it was a practical thing. I was not a clergyman. I was a layman. Laymen are not bound like clergymen are to their bishop. So now for me, I'd have to have a very good reason to leave, like heresy. But laymen don't have that problem. They can go to any church they want as long as it's Orthodox. So I made a practical decision, and I don't regret it. I've been with our synod now for about 12 years, and I'll be honest, having been true Orthodox most of my life, having gone through a few different jurisdictions, having seen a lot of these jurisdictional battles, which thank you God, if you could only see how it was, say, 20 years ago, you would understand that it was a lot worse. It's a lot better now. But I just didn't want to deal with it. And I was lucky, and I believe blessed, to find where I did. And so I'm not going to, I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm not going to, throw like, we did the True Orthodoxy episode where we basically explained, a lot of the history, and I'm sure it made a lot of people uncomfortable, and that's fine. I'm not really concerned about that. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to sit there battering on people. Like, for example, I mean, the GOC, I assume you could either mean the GOC Macarios or the GOC Kalinikos. And I don't, honestly have really a problem with either of them. I've spoken to and corresponded to priests and bishops of, I believe, if I remember correctly, both jurisdictions in the past, many years past. The Roca, I mean, it depends on which Roca you're talking about. If you're talking about Metropolitan Agafongo's Roca, I mean, we went to the glorification of Saint Philaret when they glorified him, even though other Roca synods had already done that. But they again, it's we didn't. I don't see a reason to switch because once you're clergy, especially, but in general, once you found a true bishop, you shouldn't go looking for more bishops or backup plans. And unfortunately, a lot of people did that. They looked for backup plans, and even now they still do it because jurisdictionalism and World Orthodoxy, people are still doing the same if they can get away with it. And sometimes they can't, but sometimes they do. And so the point is, what it comes down to is a lack of accountability. And what we have to focus on is personal accountability. If the situation is chaotic, that you have, perfectly Orthodox people fighting each other, your job is to try to avoid it and be above it, not take advantage of it. So I hope that that's helpful explaining me. But in any case, I don't, know why that's very important. Um, but so in any case, I said it again. In any case, I apologize. You know, but again, if there are questions about, especially about the church fathers, etc. Okay, here's a new question. Do you know of any early church ante-Nicene documents on the roles of the deaconess? To be honest, there are very few. And most of them are pretty clear as to what the role of the deaconess was, and her job was to take care of the baptism of women. And a part of this was because of the limited amount of clothing worn in early baptisms. So men were not supposed to be baptizing women with very little on. It would have been a cause of scandal. And so the point is that was primarily the deaconess's role. There was also the order of widows, which was, a real thing. And the point is that the deaconess was supposed to be an older woman. The concepts that we have of deaconesses, what would the document be? Now, that's a good question. I would have to go through. Let me just see if I can find a quick scan, and I'll see what I can find for you. Give me a second. But unfortunately, what we've done now is we've kind of modified this to where we're trying to imply that deaconesses were liturgical deaconesses. Let me see here. Let's see. The historic. I'm gonna see what we can find in terms of some. Let's see. Looking for. Okay, this is not helpful. So let's see if we can find something better. What's this? That's not found. It's not useful there. Okay, let me see. Deaconess, church fathers. Because you always have to go back to the church fathers to find them. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. Let me see here. This is an excursus on the deaconess of the early church. Well, these were usually written by Anglicans. They often had pretty good information. So let's see what they found here. Okay, hold on. All right, so let's see. We see a mention of in Tertullian, and he talks about women being were made deaconesses at the age of 60, and it was changed to 40 2 centuries later by the Council of Chalcedon. And the widow, let me see here. Who else? They're referred to in the Apostolic Constitutions. Let's see here. Do we have any more? And then this is, Saint Epiphanius refers to them as only women elders, not priestesses in any sense, that their mission was not to interfere anyway with sacerdotal functions, but simply to perform certain offices in the care of the women. So that's actually not too bad. The Council of Laodicea mentions them. And so basically those are probably, most of there are very scant references on the order of deaconesses. And so a lot of the stuff that people are saying on the matter is it's absolutely ludicrous and has no place in the fathers. So probably your best bet is Saint Epiphanius on the matter, but he clearly states that this is not a priestly role; it's a role to help with the women. As for which document it would be, it had a what appeared to be a Latin enumeration that I'm not familiar with. I have not read that much of Saint Epiphanius, but we can look it up and I can find it for the next show. Yes, and so we want to explain to a feminist that the deaconess had different non-liturgical roles. The problem is that a feminist is going to believe what she wants, regardless of what the church fathers say. And this is one of the things that people encounter. I mean, it's a good. I would suggest the excursus. I'll put a link to it. Hold on, let me see if I can find that again, and that way, it's in the First Council of Nicaea. This is. Well, let me see if I can find it in CCL. I'm not a fan of these copycat sites. And so, what's it called? Give me a second. Let me go to the 7 ecumenical councils and go to table of contents if I can get through to it. And read online. Table of contents. Go to the First ecumenical council. What was it after that? Let's see. Okay. Historical notes. Gangra. Give me just 1 second. I'll see what I can find here. Okay. Pelagianism. And so sometimes you just have to go through all the stuff to find what you were looking for. And so, go through here. They spelled Gangra wrong there. Here. Continue on. Maybe further down. It may be in Trello, but we'll find out. Okay. That's for Julius. Versus there. Marriage of the clergy. Okay. Okay. Just 1 second. Almost done here. Opening up everything and hoping to find it. As soon as I can find that, let me see here. Versus on deaconesses. Yep. So why didn't it come up in the table of contents? Of course, there it is. Okay, so I'll give you that, and we'll consider that a starting point to work with. And that's probably where you're going to find most of the most visible patristic references to the deaconesses. There aren't many. That's the sad reality. And so you have to realize that when you're talking to people who want to believe in this stuff, it doesn't matter what paucity of patristic witness they have towards it, they have an agenda to push, and they're going to push it. Okay, Russian email bot says, I've read a lot on CCCL, St. Augustine mostly. What's the Orthodox opinion of his work? I've read some stuff that's really critical. Well, again, if you're applying the consensus of the church over 2,000 years, St. Augustine's stuff is very good. Just, read it in context of all the other fathers. One of the good things about the CCEL site is that it has a section called Church Fathers, and virtually everything, with the exception of, I think, Origen and Tertullian on it, is virtually catechism. You may as well just read it all. Granted, it's thousands of pages, so you'll be reading for years, but that's my point. When people say, I can't find enough, on the fathers to read, I'm always looking in shock, and I think to myself, how is it that you managed to miss the thousands of pages that's available right now? Because I know most people who say that they're looking for more Orthodox books haven't read them. They're looking for, this or that, fly by night, the newest. They're looking for the newest things, the most exciting things. But what they're not getting is the basic meat of the fathers. The strong meat that nourishes and teaches us in the faith. So, in that sense, yeah, I would say St. Augustine is a good example of someone you can read in terms of when you're doing biblical commentaries and studies. Read St. Augustine. I would also suggest read St. John Chrysostom with him, right on CCEL, if you're using them both. Compare what they say, and they're usually mostly in agreement on each of the New Testament passages, and you'll realize that unanimity that you'll find between these two fathers and other fathers that are all over that site, it's incomparable to the world that people live in Western society. I'm not even just going to say the Protestants; the Roman Catholics do it too, because they have loads of disagreements on what certain scriptures mean. We don't have that problem. If you look at the commentaries of Blessed Theophylact, where he collected what the common patristic consensus was on each of the on the epistles and gospels, you realize how simple it is, how closely they were all united in their thinking. And that's what we have to unite ourselves to. That's what we've got to become. And so that is how we become. One thing is, we don't become better Orthodox by being original. We become better Orthodox by shunning originality. And this is something that a lot of people don't get. They're wondering what their big contribution to Orthodox thought is going to be. And the problem is, if you think like that, your big contribution to Orthodox thought is going to be zero. Your big contribution to heresy in the name of Orthodoxy might be something, but in terms of it's weird because there's still things that are obviously still written even today. And if you look at the writings of Saint Tikhon of Zadansk, it's it feels free and it feels original, but at the same time he's saying the same things that were said before. He's just using different words. And so the key is, if you can learn what that same thing is, then your expression of what that same thing is may be different because of our modern era, but the message will be the same. And that will always be fresh, and that will always be alive, because we're talking about the resurrection. It never becomes old. And so that's something that, I think people have to keep in mind. And when people start coming up with new things like, they're, I don't trust Saint Augustine, or I don't think he's this is all stuff from the 60s. I mean, it's honestly, it's garbage, and it should be rejected just like everything else from the 60s. Well, that's it's the tough part of when we're reading modern Orthodox works. It's like, what do you trust? But you can always trust the Holy Fathers, and that's the best part. You can always trust the Holy Fathers. You don't have to, worry like, is this guy a saint or a saint? If you're following what the teachings of the Holy Fathers is, and you go with the universality of the church, which you start with those thousands of pages just at the first 7 or 8 centuries, you'll have enough to work with for a lifetime. The Philokalia comes from that time. And no, I'm not suggesting read the Philokalia, because the Philokalia is super complicated. What I'm suggesting is start from the doctrinal teachings of the church. Start with the councils and fathers. Suffering orthodoxy asks, where is a good place to start with St. Augustine? Again, if you read the scriptures, his commentaries on the scriptures, the sermons on the scriptures are a good thing to read, and I suggest reading them with St. John Chrysostom. If you do these things, you'll get better at understanding what the patristic mindset of the scriptures is. And then after that, I would suggest probably reading Confessions, because that's, it's his life. And St. Augustine did not live, the greatest of lives. He was not like, he was a saint, but he didn't start out that way. And the point is, none of us do. So I think that that's a good place for a lot of people to start. Too often we get this, I don't know, this holy-itis that we think we're like something special. We need to be reminded that even the greatest of saints didn't always start out that way, and we don't either. You know, and so I agree, DL. I love reading St. John Chrysostom's commentaries too. Now let's see here. From a Protestant view, after the Apostles, almost nothing is worth reading until Luther. Basically, apparently, the fathers immediately deviated from the gospel. I don't know if that's true, because a lot of the Protestant reformers, rejected a lot of what Luther was teaching. What's it called? They were basically, he was teaching things like the ever virginity of the Theotokos. That's like Saint Jerome there, but the point is, he went in crazy town on a bunch of other things. But the point is that there were certain things he was teaching that other, Protestants were like, well, that's not in the scriptures, and they were going full anarchy mode, on everything. So the point is that, yeah, I don't know that I'd fully agree with that, but well, it's I would say that it's a difficult thing. Let's see here. Suffering Orthodoxy asks, have you read St. John Chrysostom's homilies against the Jews? Yes, I have. And I'm not, I think that, again, one of the things that should be kept in mind, because I point this out, and Father Enoch has actually put links to all of those homilies in previous shows. But it's worth noting that the bigger concern for me is what was the motivation for why St. John Chrysostom wrote what he did, and that was the constant trend towards Judaization in the church, the forgetting that the people of God are the church, and the church of the Old Testament was, that was the church then, but the Jews afterwards, having no longer the covenant being fulfilled in Christ, they were trying to preserve something that isn't there. And so the important part of that is that we have, people have a tendency towards Judaization. And we saw that in the first century church. We see that in Acts, where they had to stomp that out. We see that in the 4th century. We see that again with the rise of Islam. We see that again with the Armenians. We see that again even now with modernism. What do they go back to? You have now you've got Protestants worshiping Israel and Roman Catholics doing Passover Seders. It's insanity. The whole point is the church was given the tradition and was given the power of the covenant, of the new covenant. The rest is unnecessary. And if you boil down what St. John Chrysostom is saying, that is what he's saying, that you're following what is lost as opposed to what is true. And that's something that's, I think, lost on people. I think people like to, unfortunately, people like to live in opposition to something, and when we should live in opposition to ourselves. And so, the motivation with which you read St. John Chrysostom's homilies against the Jews has to be how to be a better Christian. And I cannot stress that enough. I think, it's unfortunate that I even have to say that. But, what are you going to do? It is important. And I would say, if you get a chance to read those, they're in CCEL, by the way. Those, it's not like they're like hiding anywhere. You can get those there. But also Tertullian.org. Father Enoch usually will talk about Tertullian.org, which actually has a copy of all the church fathers from CCL with even more fathers. So if you wanted to get an even bigger picture, you'd probably want to use Tertullian.org. But yeah, you can find those homilies and lots of other homilies there, and I suggest reading them all. And that's I know that sounds weird because we're talking about defending the Orthodox faith, but defending the Orthodox faith can only work if you fully immerse yourself in it. And I'm not saying that I have. I have not. But what I am saying is that insofar as I try to answer people, and insofar as anyone who does apologetics tries to answer people, we have to go back to the fathers. If we don't go back to the fathers and we try to come up with arguments or dialectic of our own, it's going to be trash. It may sound good, but it will never sound like the church. It will never sound like the fathers. It will be garbage. Just focus on learning the fathers. And every time you have a question, every time you have, a concern, go back to the fathers. It's that simple. And for anyone who says, I don't know what to do, well, okay, start with the scripture. Find the scripture that makes you ask a question. Go to the church fathers' commentaries on that. As I said, use CCL, use Tertullian.org. Doesn't matter to me. Use the library, but I would, if it's free if you just do it online. So the point is, that's what you have to do. So, in any case, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm going to give it about 2 minutes. Again, prayers for our friend in the monastery, and if we're good, I'm going to I'll probably shut down. At the 45 mark, we're at the 42 mark. But in any case, again, apologies. It's just me. Father Enoch, I assume, is probably praying at the hospital right now, and I'm jabbering on YouTube, which is stupid by comparison. So anyway, yeah, I want to thank everyone who was here asking questions, and I hope, if anything, something was helpful. If anything, links to Tertullian.org or ccl.org/fathers. That's the real value, if anything, that comes from these shows, is that learning the fathers is how you learn orthodoxy. And everything that you want to ask has already been answered. And that sounds weird because, sometimes we give new answers, but the answers are always based on the old answers, and they're always the same, even though they're in a slightly different form. And that's because good takes new forms in terms of new descriptions, just as evil does. Nothing that's, evil in this world is new. It's all old. And so this is, something that we deal with. And so, and that's the struggle, is because in the end, the person we're fighting most is ourselves. So I don't know if there's much else to say. We've got about a minute left. If you have questions, I will definitely try to answer. Thanks to everyone who was listening. And yeah, no problem. This is what we do. And I guess we'll be back next week. There's some debates hopefully that are lining up, and we'll see. But in any case, don't forget we do have our Discord channel. The Orthodox Apologetics Discord channel. Verum, I think you're on it, so send an invite. And to everyone else, to all those listening, I want to say thank you. And, you have a good night. And otherwise, if there are no other questions, I think it's a good time to say goodnight. Okay. So I am going to, I'm going to go, and have a good night, everyone.